Thank you, Cherise, and for that beautiful staging. So don't clang into the recording message. Lovely to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Kate Clayton. I'm a coach and facilitator and an associate of Aephoria, based in Cape Town, where we have an absolute perler of a day today. It's like the last hurrah of summer. But coming back to my background and credentials, my original background was in marketing and branding, and then moved into the coaching and facilitation space, which I absolutely love, and been working with maturity for a few years now. And as I'm sure many of you who have been doing the same have discovered, it feels like there's endless learning. It's not always predictable as to how to navigate the space with individual coaching as well as group coaching. And that's really what precipitated this session. Christo and I were working together on one of the Aephoria clients last year, and I was learning so much in the process of navigating a maturity space with another coach and facilitator. And my feeling was there's so much collective wisdom that we're each tapping into when we are working with clients. So how do we bring that space here and really share learnings from what we're experiencing? And that's really what the idea of today is. So I'm here not as an expert so much, more as a facilitator to help us leverage our learnings together and tap into the collective wisdom in the room. Christo, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Kate. I'm Christo. I'm based in Johannesburg, where we have a little bit of sunshine and then the rain and then clouds and then sunshine. It's a wonderful day. I'm also an associate with Aephoria. I am particularly involved in training for the maturity and also in the assessment of maturity, the scripts and coaching and facilitation. And in other parts of my life, I'm a biodanza facilitator. So I love getting people to dance. And I hope that we will always be dancing, even if it's only our lips that are dancing because we are in conversation. Yes, today, Kate mentioned that we worked on this in this client. And I remember, Kate, it was while we were working in this client that the idea came up that we will do a supervision. And I think at that point, it was very clear what we wanted to talk about. And then 6 or 7 months passed and we had to figure out again what we want to explore. I think what struck me as we work in this client was this relationship between maturation of the individual and the maturation of the group, and how they both are in an interaction with each other. So we want to land something of, and explore what is it like to work with the individual, and then add to it this additional piece of context, which is around, we are individuals who are part of collectives. And one of those collectives is the organization, if we are working with a leadership group or a team. And then there's families and there's societies, etc., etc., etc. And we're curious about that interplay. So we come to it with an exploratory mind, really hoping to deepen our collective understanding through what each one of you are bringing to this conversation.
Great, thank you. And so the structure for today, as Christo is sort of pointing to, is really, it's about having a conversation, like as a group, through a series of smaller breakouts. And the three or we're hoping 3 breakouts, but it may only be 2. The first breakout will be around individual maturity. How are we as coaches working with individual maturity, firstly, and we'll give you more of a brief when we move towards that. And then the second round will be how are we working with the collective and the individual in the context of the collective, of group coaching. And if we get to it, the third round will be my groups and I as a coach and facilitator. And the idea is we'll have the breakout discussion so you get to know different people and share experiences, and then we'll feed back into the plenary some of the core learning. So we're sort of building the learnings from within the breakouts and within the group, just to give you a sense of the structure. So hopefully you're here with us for the full time. I know everybody's joining from different parts of the world and different time zones, and so I'm going to invite us to start off with a little bit of a grounding practice so that we can arrive wherever we are. I see we've got some people still moving, and Alistair, so inviting you to also ground wherever you are. But as a starting point, to whether you've just sat down for the first time today or whether you've been sitting for a long time, to just invite you to move your body. So adopt any yoga stretch, posture, whatever your body is needing in this moment, to just land and be able to settle the body a little bit, because we're going to be sitting for a while in the session. And you're welcome to stand up as Audrey is and do whatever you need, whether it's a little bit of a stretch to the side, back. We often carry so much in our chests, and when we sit, so it's rounding out the shoulders can also be really helpful. So just taking care of what your body needs in this moment, and then coming back to settle in the chair and finding a relaxed, upright position. And inviting you to lower your gaze or close your eyes just for a few moments. And bringing attention to both your feet on the floor. Feel the grounding of that center of gravity. Becoming aware of your bum on the seat. Your back against the back of the chair. And taking 3 slightly deeper breaths in, one at a time, and out. So breathing in and longer and deeper out. And repeating that for yourself. Just taking a moment to land here in this space. And then when you're ready, opening your eyes, if they've been closed, and just taking in what's immediately in front of you. And coming to the screen of amazing people, amazing collective that is the Aephoria community. And before we get into the breakouts, we're going to just take a couple of minutes to position what we're talking about today and to land you in that context. And we actually thought it would be useful just to get a little bit of a show of hands. Who has done the level 2 Aephoria training on maturation? And if we can just have hands up either electronically or just to get a feel in the space. Okay. And we also know some of you perhaps have done other trainings. Okay, Christo, what are you seeing? Like quite a few people who haven't done it.
Yes, I see some has, some
Yeah,
hasn't.
yeah.
And And
Great.
some knows a lot more than you and I.
Yes, exactly.
So so we go to just play with that little bit of complexity. It means that we have to at least say what we are speaking about when we speak about maturity, and what's our approach to it, and why we are doing it, and how it fits in the whole Aephoria, enablement of our coaching practice and our development practice. So I don't want to spend endless time on this, but it's still important that we do spend a little bit of time. So I'm just going to share some stuff with you. Oh, okay. We don't have to stick at the what are we going to do today slide. So you know that in Aephoria, when we work in Aephoria, we work with both the Enneagram and with maturity, with a maturation assessment as frameworks or as lenses that helps us in the work with our clients. So one of the ways in which we look at this is that we combine both horizontal and vertical development. So horizontal development is development. You can't help mixing this stuff up when you speak about it. Horizontal development is development within a stage, and stage, of course, is within a vertical kind of structure. Horizontal development, and we can consider, an approach to the Enneagram, as horizontal. That means that there is and I want you to almost think like horizontally. It is on this plane that I'm seeing my fixations, and I'm seeing my habits, and I'm seeing my passions, and I also seeing and something about the way that I am in the world becomes visible to me. And there's something about that, the way in which I am in the world, that becomes visible to me, that feels like it's always there. Some sense of myself has always been around, even since I was a child, and then I was older, and I'm still having the same habits, and now I'm much older, and I'm still having the same habits, but a little bit differently. So the maturation combination with the Enneagram is that we can see that fixation, for instance, how it shifts through different stages of our maturation process. So if I'm an Enneagram 1 and I'm really fixated upon perfection and getting everything right and making sure that I'm a good person, etc., 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 it looks different when I'm a teenager. And when I am in the stage of my life where I'm, really connecting to fledgling community, and to the stage of my life where I'm becoming an expert, it looks different. Something's changed about that fixation. And that's what we want to understand, is not just this picture of myself as someone with a dominant style and a try-fix and dominant instinct, etc., but also how it changes through what we must call a maturation process, or a growth process. And one of the ways that we can think of that vertical development, that growing through stages, is in terms of complexity. When I am, when we humans, we are first we grow in a womb, which is a very contained space, which simplifies matters for us massively. And then we are born, and suddenly we have to deal with other human beings besides our mother. And so the world becomes more complex. And so it continues to become more complex. As a teenager, it's got more complexity than in the early. And then in adulthood, this complexity continues to increase. and I maintain a certain sense of myself that can, well, that can cope with that complexity or cannot cope with that complexity. So that's part of this vertical development, is that there's an increase of complexity and also an increase of my capacity to come to terms with the complexity. And my capacity to come to terms with that complexity really is this thing that we call inner world. The world that encounters the world in which I am making sense of my life and exist. So that's just very briefly about that. So in our maturation framework, we have that combines two. So you have the Enneagram report, so this person is an Enneagram 8, 3, 7, self-preservation, social blind, etc. There's some stuff that you may suspect this person to be. And then there's the maturation report. And that has two aspects. The one is maturation theory, and that has been developing through a lineage of people who have been working in maturation. Susanus here and Tolbert and Keegan and many others have been developing maturation theory. So that's a basis. That gives us the ability to describe stages, to figure out what's common to a stage, what makes up a stage, and also things like how do people move through stages. And then in our report, also very important is this aspect of existentialism. Our approach to coaching in general is an existentialist approach. And what existentialism gives us is information about the facts of our existence and also how we are coming to terms with those facts of our existence. So if you look at our report, for instance, you look at the sentence completions, there are these existential issues like death and money and sex and I don't know, success and change, and all of those things. How do we come to terms? Freedom, very important. And people complete that, and we get a sense of what's going on in this person's life, what is salient. And then also, how do they come to terms with that? Here we can speak of the logics. And I'll say a little bit more about logics. You must shout. I think I have the sense that I'm between two chairs. Speaking into my own ignorance and speaking into the ignorance or lack of ignorance of others. So this is our map of development. Broadly, you can see broad. This is the broad picture of the map. There are two distinct parts of this life journey of maturation. The one is conventional and the one is post-conventional. And most of the people that have been assessed across the world in all of the assessments are in the conventional stages. They assess in the conventional stages, less than 20% post-conventional. And of course, our theory is that as everything becomes more complex, we also need to develop a capacity for more complexity, which means that, we really need to move on. There is an urgency to our development, to our maturation, even though we can't force it. So in the conventional stages, it's linear. I acquire greater knowledge about my world, about this external world. I am able to form a sense of myself, an ego, in this outer world. You have this thing of the ego as the meeting place of the internal world and the outer world. But there's, in the conventional stages, the access to the inner world is still very early. And the earlier we go into the stages. So now this ego develops, and I need to, what this ego that develops is my work in the conventional stages to develop my ego. develops, and I have to protect it, and I have to protect and defend my identity. And I base this identity on what's conventional. What's there in the outer world that can give me cues, that can tell me, what is a good person to be? What is the kind of person that I must be so that I can feel better about myself, if we can put it in one kind of a way. And of course, there's increasing differentiation here. So I identify at a certain level, and then in a way, in the conventional stages, I have to give up this identification and identify at another level. And then in the post-conventional stages, this is where we can speak of growing wisdom and compassion. If we say that in the conventional stages, as far as our identity is concerned, we protect and defend, we exclude. We exclude from, well, this is me, that's not me. Even if what this is me and what that's not me may change over time, there's still a very strong boundary between this is me and that's not me. Now, in the post-conventional stages, there's almost a dismantling of that boundaries. So my identity can expand, and I can start to integrate all kinds of aspects of my being that I, for whatever reason, in the conventional stages, have been keeping out, have been containing, constraining, so that part of development can take place. So we no longer perhaps try to make ourselves feel better about ourselves so much in the post-conventional stages, or less and less and less, because more and more of what is possible are brought into our sense of ourselves. Any questions at this point? And then just our stages there, you can see it's a reminder for those who have done it. And because many of you have not done it, I will just quickly speak into it. In the conventional stages, I attach my identity to something specific. So in the self-protecting stage, that first stage is almost a stage that's just between childhood proper, in other words, childhood where you are completely in the family organism, and adulthood. And of course, it can extend in either directions. But I attach my identity to what I want and what I need and my pleasure. So you can see the perspective here is very short-term. It's very opportunistic. It's sometimes called the opportunist. Then that identity, that part of the journey becomes integrated, and now it's no longer enough for me to just pay attention to my own wants and needs and pleasures. I can, I live into the limits of that sense of myself, and then I expand my identity so that, well, now my identity is the same as my group. So it means that I have to give up, sacrifice, you may say, some of my immediate needs and wants and pleasures, and build in a little bit of delayed gratification, so that I may fit into the group, so that I may conform to the values and the norms and the moods of the group, so that I can have a sense of belonging. So my identity is the same as the identity of the group. You see a lot of that in the society, don't you? Is that we can maybe see it in a micro way at sports event. We're all Springboks, and we all sing the same song. We're all happy when we're all happy, and we're all sad when we're all sad. And don't you dare do anything else. It's nice, it's wonderful, we belong, and then at some point it becomes, it's also quite simple, but at some point some things in myself and some things in the external world become more complex. And I feel like, yeah, but I don't always agree. What now? And yes, but I've been learning some stuff, and that is not quite what you guys believe. And I develop develops in me movement into the next stage, which is the specializing stage. And here, my identity is connected to my job, my technical skills, my expertise, my sense of right and wrong, my capacity to think analytically, all of those kinds of things. And it is individualizing. I'm no longer just a group. I'm now me, with my own intelligence and my own capacity to think. No, in the conforming stage, probably we don't really think. We believe things, but we don't really think. But here we develop the discipline of thinking and the discipline of paying attention to detail and the discipline of discipline itself. So it's a very important stage. It's a very important stage socially because, it's when we move into jobs, for instance, when we move out of university and start to work, those of us who are fortunate, right? We sit in a society where it's very difficult for people to find those kinds of opportunities. And then specializing, I have all the knowledge, I have knowledge, I can control my environment and my world through knowledge. And we can be bureaucratic and right about processes, etc., etc., etc. And then that's no longer sufficient. So the next stage that develops after that is, yes, I have all this knowledge, I have all this expertise, I can never be top of the game forever as far as knowledge and expertise is concerned, but there's something bigger to which I can pay attention to, and to which according to which I can construct my sense of myself. So here, my identity becomes linked to the outcomes that I achieve, to the impact that I have. Sometimes, in the scripts we can see to the legacy that I want to leave. I can see that I'm not just knowing stuff, I'm also having an impact on the world. And I'm not just thinking about what I know, but I'm thinking about what does that actually mean for the rest of us in this particular system in which we find ourselves. There's in the performing stage, there's also more of a sense of, I have a psychology. I have fixations, and I have a shadow, and I have desires and emotions. Above all, I have emotions, and so do other people. So I can pay attention to the emotions of other people. I can become more effective, and I can, performing. I can perform. I am performing. That's kind of the apex of the conventional development. It is the high point of life in the external world. From here, it's all downhill and suffering for the first part, much more suffering and much more doubts and all sorts of wonderful things, but also much more joy and curiosity and all of these things. So there's a huge transition between conventional development and our post-conventional growth. Here it is almost like much of what we have pushed aside in this conventional process of development, that we have avoided or even amputated, that comes back to us. And it is also a matter of the inner world now really become visible to us as inner world. In the performing stage, we always have an inner world. But in the performing stage, our inner world is still, in a way, almost projected onto the outer world. Now we no longer project the inner world onto the outer world. We engage with the inner world as a real field of our existence. And all the things of the inner world, the emotions, the shadows, the longings, come back to us. So the internalizing stage, the stage in which we remember what we wanted, what we desired. We begin to remember something of the true human being whom we wanted to be. And we perhaps feel a lot of grief for what we did not, what we set aside along the road. You can see there's an enormous shift in depth that takes place here, as I am now really concerned with who am I really, and having to come to terms with what is presented to me as who am I really. In this stage, you will see that people are very democratic, perhaps, very inclusive. You can see much more attention to minority views, minority perspectives. And you can also see a lot more suffering. It's like people in this, it's often not always, but often this stage is a stage of turmoil and of great uncertainty and of difficulty. I also think it's a stage of much joy. It's a stage of enormous energy, this discovery of yourself is enormously energizing. And then, thank God, eventually maybe we get out of that stage and we go into the strategizing stage. Strategizing stage, almost like we've been wading through we've been wading through a swamp, and there wasn't much firm ground beneath our feet. And in strategizing, it suddenly feels like, oh, okay, there's a little bit of ground beneath my feet again, and I think there is like a sudden clarity about some things. And this clarity come from a much expanded perspective. And it is a perspective that includes various domains of knowledge and various forms of knowing. So it may not just be analytical knowing or pragmatic knowing. It's also mythological knowing. And it's also, above all, it's like deeply complex systemic, the kind of knowing. It's almost, it's almost here a sense of having an ecological self, a self that is deeply interconnected in all the systems. And I participate in the, participate in the world and in the systems of the world. I am in the conventional stages, I participate in the world, but the world is kind of an object on which I work. Here I'm in the system, and I'm part of the system, and I can see that, and at the same time, I can see the system itself. And I was thinking this morning then about the next, there's like in all the stages we get stuck. And we get stuck in strategizing as well, because we fall in love with models and we fall in love with our wonderfully clever language. And then we can spin around there in strategizing. And how do we then transform into the transforming stage? And this ability to just be, and I don't want to say too much about this stage, and I certainly don't want to say anything about the next stage, the being stage. But it seems to me almost like in all of these stages, even in strategizing, there's still an aspect of me that tries to be. and tries to be means to include some stuff and to exclude some other stuff. And in the transforming stage, there's what happens is I discover that, well, actually, I'm just being. And all there's no trying. So the trying begins to fall away. And so I'm perhaps no longer trying to perfect myself or to be so incredibly good or even to feel better about myself. and all the paradoxes that come with that. Tell me where you are. It's a whole lot.
It is.
I've said a whole lot of things.
Christo, maybe we should take it off screen share and just see if there are any questions at this point before we move into a breakout. Any questions? Some of you have seen that before. For some of you, it's new. Any further clarity needed before we go into some engagement around it? Annalita, yeah. You're on mute.
You're still on mute.
Still on mute, Annalita. The button's not wanting. There we go.
Good afternoon, everybody. I haven't done the level 2 training, but I've been assessed for maturity a couple of years ago. And at the time, my feedback showed that I'm quite mature in relation to my colleagues at the time. Since then, I've left my job under difficult circumstances, and I'm sort of jobless. My question is, can it happen that I regressed in my maturity? Because I just feel so useless and hopeless and don't fit anywhere. And it seems like I've totally been from knowing who I am and what I'm worth to just nothing. Just my question.
The one part of the answer, and I don't know if that's the answer for you, is that yes, one can fall back. That's part of the theory, you know, sometimes given circumstances or, yeah, circumstances. Given circumstances, we fall back. And that means that we no longer have access to the logics of the stage where we were. In all of our lives, there's like micro fallbacks all of the time. You know, you may be operating at strategizing, and then I don't know, you walk into your family and you're right back in conforming, or something that may happen. But Annalita, in your own case, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, maybe your doubts and your uncertainties is not because of fallback. So that would, I think, and I just want to hold that out as that when we use the framework, it does not mean that we have easy answers. Because we really have to understand much more and make sense of much more. You know, it can be a very hopeful place to not know what's going on, but it can also be very lonely and very frustrating.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe if I can add, those stages look quite distinct in the way the graphic has been, is portrayed, but they're not that distinct. It's quite like they blend into each other. And we often have a range, right, where we will move forward in some contexts, as Christo said, and move back in others. So when we come out at a center of gravity, it doesn't necessarily mean that's where we always located and where we stay. That's the one thing. But the other thing that pops up, Annalita, with your question, and I see that now there are lots of questions coming, that I used to feel so confident can often come with more of the conventional stages and the, oh, now I don't know where I am, I feel a bit lost. That is characteristic often of the internalizing, the moving into the post-conventional stages. So, and I have no idea, you know, where your profile sits, but just wanted to offer that also as a,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I see it was Asana and then Peter. I just
Yeah.
want to say something about the language. The language around maturity. It's something that Julia also brings up. It's valuable for us to not speak of more or less mature, but rather to speak of earlier or later stages of maturity. And then it is also valuable for us to not say someone is at X stage, but rather to say that person at the moment has a center of gravity in X stage. One of the difficulties for us with working with maturation models is that it's hierarchical. And we're at a point in our social development, and it's also an aspect of internalizing where we are quite allergic to hierarchies of any kind. So sometimes we try, no, it's not a hierarchy. Yeah, it is. It is a vertical. There is an expansion. It becomes larger. It doesn't become smaller, and it expands in a direction. So that's something. And we want to expand. We have this ambition as human beings to expand in a direction. So we don't want to grow smaller. But of course, the moment we work with models like that, there's issues attached, you know, like shame attached to it, or we can get caught up in our own developmental narratives of, yeah, we must keep growing, and why am I not further yet, etc., etc., etc. So I want to say this right up front that, you know, the language that we use about, we never speak of higher or lower maturity. That would just not be right. The language that we use is really, really very important. So that we are aware that we use the maturation framework as a way to gain perspective on the logics of someone's approach to the world at a certain point for them and for us as coaches and for their colleagues maybe. So that, because, you know, if we can understand something about where we are, we can maybe see more clearly around us where we want to go. Yes.
I'm going to suggest that we move and come to
Asanda. Yeah.
Asanda first.
Okay. I'm just, maybe it goes into what Annalita was talking about, because I'm just wondering how much, like in a capitalistic society, like in the system that we live in right now, how much of this maturity is facilitated by capitalism and access to, so if you're talking about specialization, right? Like, sounds to me like that one specializes through like some kind of education that channels someone into like some kind of like corporate environment, and then you kind of, how much of this model linked to the system that we're in, which is capitalism, and what are the other like how do we initiate people in a society like ours, for example, there's not a lot of opportunities for people to specialize in corporate environments. Yeah, so I don't know if you understand my question.
Yeah. It's a big question.
We could do a whole session just on that, Asanda.
Capitalism and maturity. Yes, indeed. Yeah. I without without being specific, Asanda, about because there's so much that we can say about capitalism, is the one part is, of course, our movement through the stages are deeply influenced by context. And of course, our context is largely capitalist. And capitalism will perhaps enable some stuff and most certainly constrain some stuff. So in just that example of specializing is it's really important for people to get to a point where they learn to do something well, learn to understand something well, and gain the confidence of going out and doing work and being able to answer questions about the stuff that you are doing. It's really important. I don't think it's only capitalism that enables that. And I don't think it's only capitalism that constrains that. And the same with the other stages. I think capitalism, to a large extent, would like us to stop in conventional because it's really very productive to be conventional. But, that's also part of a bigger conversation. I think part of the other question, part of what's in your question is something around, is maturation universal? Are there these stages? Will we see these stages regardless of system? And I think so, but I also don't know entirely. Yeah, I don't know entirely. I haven't studied societies that have not been caught up in capitalism. So I don't know. We work with the framework with hopefulness, also that this will give us a way to come to see capitalism more clearly. If we expand our perspective and we get out of the performing place where we are very effective within the system, so that we can get to the internalizing place where we can actually really look at the system, and the strategizing space where perhaps other possibilities become visible to us. That's the hopefulness with which we do the work.
Thanks, Christo. Let's come to Peter, and then we'll move into some breakouts.
Thanks very much. Very useful, because I haven't done that, the maturity thing. So great summary. In my brain, it was kind of flowing quite well, which was like, as you start young and then you get older, and you can kind of see that legacy thing, people retiring, and the grief, and then obviously just the being at the end is, well, you're sort of dead. You're dead. That's where you land up. But I had this weird other thing going on, which is I was seeing it very much through an Enneagram lens of sort of your self-preservation at the beginning, but then your specializing sounded like a 5, your performing sounded like a 3, your internalizing sounded like a 4, which obviously wouldn't be true because everyone's got their own number. One number isn't better than another. And so I didn't know where to go with that. It was sort of felt like if you can gain different parts of the different numbers to help you in your journey, that would be useful.
I
don't know. So it was just like, hey, is that like, what am I seeing there? What do I do with it?
I love your instinct that there's something going on. And it's true, conforming looks a bit 9-ish or 6-ish. And specializing looks a bit 1-ish or 5-ish. And performing is maybe very 3, 8. And there's no question, internalizing 4. But and so that's true. It's got like something of the character of it. You know, if you can say a stage has got some kind of character, we can see it. But at the same time, someone who's an Enneagram 9 or an Enneagram 2, they also have to go through specializing. And it also express in a particular way. So this is important, is at specializing, let's say we talk about specializing stage, someone who is an Enneagram 2 and someone who is an Enneagram 5 may look quite different here. And at the same time, what we can see in both of them is a certain kind of logic. So it's specializing the logic, let's say the thinking logic is rational, facts, analytical, more knowledge, deeper, factual data, preferably quantifiable, etc., etc., etc. And you will see that in the Enneagram 2 in a different way from the Enneagram 5, but you would see that logic. So that's one of the it's it's the kind of correlation that is interesting. Hold it lightly. That would be my thing. And then at the same time, if you take your trifix, you can maybe look at the different stages and see if, when you were in conforming stage, which one of the three of your trifix really played big out. But also, I'm not basing this on a lot of information or science. So take it lightly.
Peter, and maybe to respond to your first point that you were correlating it with, from birth to death, just to remember that 80% of adults only get to conventional stages of performing. So very few adults move into the post-conventional stages. So it's not a given that is going to happen. And in fact, as coaches and facilitators, most of us know that when we are working with clients, we are working in the conventional stages predominantly. Because that is where most adults sit, and certainly adults in organizations predominantly are in those spaces. So it's not a given. We're not all going to being. There are less than, I think, 1% that head in that direction.
Yeah, just on that, Kate. It's really important that that stage is not age. It's really important that stage is not age. You have to grow older to mature, but growing older does not mean maturation or going through many stages.
Great. Great questions. Getting us warmed up for the breakouts. So we're going to move into the breakouts, and the first round is individual maturity. So for those of you who have debriefed on individual maturity, the question is, what have you found most rewarding and what is most challenging? So what is most rewarding and what is most challenging? For those of you who haven't worked with this directly, given that you've now seen the model and have a little bit of a sense of what it's about, what feelings or questions are coming up for you around if you were to use this with clients? So I guess we're making the assumption that everybody's sort of in the coaching facilitation space. So just so that those of you who haven't worked with it directly have something to reflect on. And obviously introduce yourself to your colleagues. They're groups of 3 or 4. There's 15 minutes in the breakouts. We'll pop the questions across to you again, but enjoy the connections and interactions. I'm opening the rooms. Yeah. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had good conversations. We're going to hear from you in a moment. But just to recontract with you, now that we've seen that so few, actually not many of you have done the level 2 training, we're going to rather stay more in plenary. So we won't go back for a second breakout. we'll rather harness the learnings here so that we can bring everybody with us. That's also why we spent more time going into the model and really introducing it to those who haven't come across it yet. So just wanted to recontract around that. The other thing is to respond to your point in the chat, Lee, which talks to Hudson and Riso have done excellent work in creating the levels of development for each of the Enneagram types, which to some extent is not the same, but it does relate to maturation and the Enneagram. And so the way Aephoria works with that is the Enneagram sits alongside the maturation. And so you would have an Enneagram 8 at self-protecting, having a particular profile, an Enneagram 8 at conforming, having a particular profile, specializing, etc., all the way. And effectively, that points to how the Enneagram 8 loosens, as an example, loosens its patterning as the maturation moves into later stages. So it correlates with defenses coming down, and therefore the patterns loosen a little bit, and one has access to more perspective, more of oneself, and moving into the post-conventional. So just wanted to name that. And so if you do an assessment with Aephoria or use Aephoria assessment, that information is very much available so that clients then work with the Enneagram type and the maturation as a side-by-side system that work hand in hand and are both offering pointers as to the sort of pathway for development. Let's hear how your conversations went. What came up? So perhaps, yeah, anybody who is working with this, what's most rewarding, what's most challenging? We'd love to hear a little bit about what came up in the groups.
We should also have asked what's most beneficial. We didn't, but if you have thoughts about that.
Riley, great.
I'll go first. So we had a very interesting group because I was explaining how I'm mostly at the moment still just using Enneagram and maturity for my own understanding of life and people and everything else. And then we had someone who's in one-on-one coaching, and we had someone who's in teams and corporate coaching. So it's like these three different, and we're all kind of newbies and just learning the system. So that was interesting conversations about first like instincts and how it feels and lands. And I have done my assessment and level 2, so I had a little bit more experience with it. And I was just explaining how the biggest benefit I got from it as a client was just feeling immensely seen and allowed and understood, because I felt like I was in quite a tricky part of my life, and I lost all my confidence to the earlier ladies. Annalita's messaging, like, just thought the whole world is just throwing stuff at me and I don't know anymore, anything. And then just through my assessments results, I just was, everything it said was like, oh, that's why I'm dealing with that. That's why I'm feeling like that. So I just think it's very useful in that sense, if and when it resonates, and for me it really did. And then the challenge would be, I was just joking a little bit and saying that I judge my brother and my sister and my mother and everyone going, oh gosh, yes, you're so specializing right now. And I suppose even then in a professional sense, that, as you mentioned, like, it's not hierarchical, and to not see some as better than others, and really just, I feel that it fosters amazing empathy and understanding layered on top of the Enneagram, which already explained and exposed a lot of just how different people show up differently. So yeah, kumbaya, it all just makes me understand and love people more, which is great.
That's so beautiful. Thank you, Miley. I mean, when we when we learn a system that allows us to come to certain conclusions about the world, then I think it's like very hard for us to avoid using that system for a while, perhaps indiscriminately. So we can't help, you know, making assessments of our family or of the president or of so I find it, you know, it's like a human need. So do it, because it's also good practice. Maybe not on your family, but the president of the country, yes. Movies, yes, etc., etc. So very safe. Maybe not your colleagues, but we can't help it. So we must just be very conscious that we are actually, in fact, really doing it.
Mm. Mm. Madeleine, and just something to add. Yeah, I really love what you've said. Like, I feel seen, I felt seen, allowed, understood. Right. So there's something, the Enneagram goes a long way to offering some of that, but the maturation adds another layer, and sometimes just explain some of the things that have felt absolutely inexplicable. And that's so helpful. So it's another frame that really helps us make sense of where we are. Yeah, thank you. Jonathan.
So I can't speak directly from an Aephoria assessment perspective, but from similar assessments, it seems to me that a potential challenge is that as much as we might say that later isn't better than earlier, it's hard for people to really believe that often. And I wondered about a certain asymmetry in terms of how it might be more helpful for people at later stages to look back and make sense of distinctions among earlier stages versus how it lands for somebody at an earlier stage in terms of helping them see what they're not seeing, particularly if you can't just quickly jump to the next stage. You know, and just the example I thought of, which is an extreme case, is, you know, there are medical tests which will tell you something that you then can't do anything about. And, you know, what are the ethics of that? So in what ways is this better than that?
Yeah, that's that's an interesting conundrum. I love what you say about the later stages making sense, looking back. The later better thing, because it is so that we have this energy that wants to expand, that wants to become more integrated, that wants to we want to become more wise, we want to become more compassionate, and to be honest, we do it because we really think that is better for not just for us but for all of us. To some extent, we do have that. So how do we then work with later and earlier in such a way that earlier is not diminished? I loved the one thing that I do that Miley said that it gave her more empathy, more compassion. I personally do think that if we work with maturation and we become aware of maturation, it does give us another entry point into our own compassion, because we can actually really come to understand where people are coming from faster, more, you know, perhaps more accurately. I would say, Jonathan, for me, one of the values of making the stage visible and the stage model visible to people at earlier stages, one of them is that, well, it makes other people visible in ways that maybe was just frustrating or perplexing. So that's one very helpful thing. And then I think if we can work very carefully with some things that are perhaps, like, let's say, specializing, performing is so achievement, perfection oriented, that becomes part of how we approach the framework. If we can work with that carefully, and perhaps enable some kind of shift towards a narrative of unfolding rather, and unfolding from where we are. Then an understanding of, oh, I'm operating from these logics. It seems to me that these logics are now constraining me in certain ways, even though they are enabling other things. And there's something about the unfolding into those logics that are becoming available to me. And in my experience working with people, sometimes, you work with someone in specializing for whom performing is opening up. Giving it language is helpful. It's been helpful. It's been it has been like a little bit of a mapping. It gave people a map for something that maybe before then didn't quite have a map, even though the map is still not a territory.
Yeah, and I would add on, not taking away from your point, Jonathan, but for some people, the earlier stages, having a debrief one-on-one, because the individual results are never disclosed in a group setting or a team setting, right? We keep it that, we hold that boundary tightly because of the inferred hierarchy. But when people see it individually in that individual debrief, sometimes it's a real motivator. They often come in feeling like they've arrived and they've done all the development they need to do, but they're coming in at quite early stages of maturity. And so it becomes there's more. I didn't even know that there was more. Yeah. Miriam, let's come to you. Where's Miriam? Miriam, you're on mute.
Okay, I'll start again. The
Thank
thing
you.
that I love about the assessment is that it gives me an intimate view into the person's world. For me, it's about having more compassion for wherever they are. And when I do the assessment with the Enneagram, it really brings up this whole picture of their dualities, which is so important, and really seeing what they're struggling with and what they're suffering. And it's not about bringing them or coaching them to the next level, wherever it is. It's about being with them where they are. And for me, it's very gratifying and challenging sometimes. And that's what I really love about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam.
Beautifully articulated, Miriam. It's a stretch. It's a stretch to coach with this material. It's not a formulaic approach. It's throwing that out the window and really, as you say, being with people and being with them in their struggles and exploring those. Yeah. Yeah. Audrey?
Yeah. What I shared in the group was, I just did the level 2 training, and in fact I have my first debrief tomorrow and the other one next week. But those are people that I know very well, that I have mentored last year, and I expect it to be wonderful conversation. But as we are all, I suppose, grappling with or playing with how to use this, how to integrate it into our practice, what we feel comfortable with, what not so comfortable with, I have had by now 3 existing clients that I've walked the road with, where, and as I sat here, I recognized the pattern where I did introduce the model in the session, that it was in all 3 cases for clients who are who have 1 foot in this level and 1 foot in that level, and it's causing so much tension. So it just kind of happened naturally to, so to say, oh, you know, funny that you describe it like that, but to paraphrase it like in the language of this, and they all 3 were just really amazed and blown away, and like such valuable insights. I mean, this client this morning also is like, thank you for such a valuable session today. You're going. So in all 3 of those cases, I've had a relationship with them already, and it was in the context of what they are working with, but it was very valuable for them. I still have my personal hesitancy about whether or not I will do a cold report, like let someone fill in a report, whack them with that, and then we sit and do a debrief. But I think all of you have like gone through that process, or decided, you know, what works best, what you feel comfortable with. Do you have any comments on this or advice?
Sure. I so relate to that, you know, having completed level 2 and then having to do the first one. It's like, eek, how to do this well, how to not offend, how to not step on some of the landmines, especially the hierarchy. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to add, Kate, it's like, because while working with developmental models isn't new for me at all. I do developmental coaching, but we would never share that assessment with a client, ever. So sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I love about what you say, Audrey, is even people they haven't done the assessments, and you had and because you have this lens and your attention has been sharpened to some possibility, you could lead a conversation or make sense of a conversation as here we are dealing with transition, and how the language, just the language of that, just that perspective and the language of that gave both you and the client the foundation for a conversation you perhaps otherwise wouldn't have had. Perhaps you would have had it anyways at some point. But and for me, there's so much, you know, that in the value that lies precisely in that is that it gives us something that, look, as coaches, we must meet our clients where they are, and we do that anyway. This gives us a little bit more about where they are, and it opens up a whole lot of understanding for us. And I think for us as coaches, it's, you know, something like maturity is, I have a sense we can get stuck on this difficulty of the hierarchical thing. But personally, I never really had in debriefs issues with it, because you'd rather focus on like, wow, look, you have grown already. So you know what it's like. There was a stage where you were like that and then like that. What happened? You know, so you're growing. Hurrah. And now you are here. And what now? And just in that, those moments of sense making, something becomes possible. So for me, maturation, the whole look of my is something that makes something possible. And that's, you know, just you knew it, they didn't know it, and already something happened.
Yeah. And Audrey, from also being hesitant when I first started with it, I now do lots of debriefs, which are one-offs. And people get huge value out of them, I mean, they debriefs that cover the Enneagram with the maturation assessment. And I mean, there's always a lot that people get out of the Enneagram, but the maturation often just provides a slightly different like frame or lens that helps them make sense with what's happening for them. Yeah. So very, very helpful. Yeah. So to your point around context, but yeah, certainly helps us land like what is happening in their context, their bigger context, the maturation piece. Yeah. Other questions, or anybody who hasn't worked with it, feelings, questions coming up, anything else coming up? Yes, Karen.
Sorry, I have worked with it, but I just want to ask you, I have a client that's Enneagram 5, very strong 4, 541, and she requested to do this adult maturity, and I've coached her for quite a long time, so I know her quite well. And she first came up, the questions actually completely shut her down and triggered her. And then I thought it may be useful for her to redo it. She was on holiday when she did it. She actually lives away. She lives in Europe, and she was in South Africa when she did the questions, which really triggered her and put her at specializing level. It triggered her to such an extent that she gave such short answers, which is not her at all. She's a very deep philosophical person, and knows a lot about all different kinds of things. I would have definitely not thought she was specializing, but the way she answered the questions was so unlike her personality. And she actually was quite angry after doing the questionnaire. Honestly, I did not expect such a reaction. And then I got permission for her to repeat the test when she was back in her home country. And she came out as internalizing. That's quite a difference.
Yeah.
And her questions, the way I'm going to be unpacking it with her next week. And the way she answered the questions the second time is completely different. You know what I mean? It's just, how one's environment that you're in could maybe outside influences could have such an influence on her to have shut her down to such an extent. And then when she was in her normal place of, where she lives, an entirely different way of being, post-conventional. I'm just curious to your views about that.
It's wonderful. It's a wonderful example, because there's for the first assessment, there's of course the question, what happened here? What was the triggers? How did you end up in specializing in this moment of what we would call fallback?
Yes.
And it's always useful to remember that when we speak about the center of gravity, it's your center of gravity at a specific point in time. That point in time can be 7 years or 10 years, but it can also be just now. And I think the other thing that's so interesting is the thing that we're not really going to get to today, but it is the thing of the individual and the collective, and the collective as a context for your maturation, and a context for how you show up in the world, and that some contexts just really trigger us like immensely. Let's say where did you say she's from? Europe?
Yeah, she's from a country in
so
Europe.
you're from nice, safe Europe, and now you're in wild Africa or
A very safe country in Europe. I won't say which one, but
you're in South Africa, where it's a
technically
bit
not Russia.
wild, And we drive like this, and you have to look over your shoulder, you have to be awake in a whole different way.
True.
So your stage as like is and we see it, someone is performing at work, and they go home to the family event, and they're like boom, down in conforming, because it's almost like the collective has its own center of gravity, and like a center of gravity, it draws towards it. Yeah, that's the issue in teams and in organizations as well. Maybe you're pushing into performing, but your whole team is trying to keep you in specializing. And performing behaviors are not understood, etc., etc. So now you pull back into specializing. And that's part of what happens and part of what we need to become conscious of. Because now we're in a situation where we suddenly feel, hey, I have to defend my ego. You know, I have to at least be a European who knows stuff and who knows what's right and wrong, etc., etc. This wild African context. Well, back in my nice European country, I can relax again and be post-conventional. It's so interesting. She must come more to South Africa. It's very good.
And maybe to add another aspect, Corin, you know, with assessments, how we position assessments is really key, right? And at Aephoria, the whole idea with these assessments is not to put people in a box. It's to really use the assessments as conversation starters to help make sense of where we are and how we make sense of our patterns, both the Enneagram and the maturity. It's not to take it as well, that's a hard fact, this is where I am. It's more it's a conversation starter. But that's really important too. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Audrey. And then Lovemore.
I think this is such a lovely stage also into what you guys have talked and what you mentioned in the beginning, that I'm coaching the person, but what's the environment or the group, right? And that made me think, Christo, of that Betty Draper video, you know, where actually her group is more mature than she is at that point, you know, and that it would make more sense to first coach her deeper into that group, you know, because that was a group that would support her growth as a whole. Is there anything, examples that you guys can think of? Or?
Well, you know what, like the organization that Kate and I mentioned that we worked in earlier this year, it's like, or last year. It's a research organization with a policy focus. So it wants to influence policy, but you can imagine a research organization, lots of people come out of academia into this organization. So a lot of academic ethos in there and also academic habit. So we have to, you know, do proper research. We have to write long reports. We have to prove our expertise. I have to prove my expertise, etc., etc., etc. And we have to have like sometimes quite vicious little battles with each other because that's what we do. You know, specializing can be quite prickly. And then another part of the organization that just like, hey, you know, why are we doing this work? Because we want to influence policy. And that means that we have to be impactful. We have to make sure we communicate with our clients in ways that they can actually understand. It means that we have to work differently, collaboratively with each other, etc., etc. So there's a movement towards, so the organization wants to move more towards performing, but it's always going to have specializing as an aspect because it's always going to get specializing people into the organization. And it's always going to have that capacity. And at the same time, that specializing needs to adapt and sometimes open up into, okay, you know, why are we actually doing this research? And are we having the impact that we want to have? So in that space, you know, some people are specializing, some people are in performing. It's helpful for them to understand each other. And it's also helpful for the specializing people to begin to see that, you know, I can still be an expert. I can still be valued as an expert. And I can learn to have better feedback conversations with my colleagues. And and perhaps there's a shift into the next stage. So in this organization, the space is there in the organization. I don't think organizations are ever simple. I think they're almost like little islands of centers of gravities inside organizations. And it can be a pull. You can support this organization so that the pull into performing becomes stronger and that there's less resistance to it.
And Audrey, maybe you can imagine like the power of working with people individually in a team at the same time as working with the team on their maturation. Like how potent that can be, because you'll have a range of people in the team and you can pair people up who will help stretch perspectives and stretch ideas and then come back into individual coaching sessions and work with that. So it's super interesting when we add team and individual, and how do we work with both in the context in both those contexts to advance the maturation. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm signed up for the teams in May, but I still need to finish this one first. I'm excited.
Got it. Just trying to escape the sun. It's beating in here. And Lovemore, we're going to come to you. I just wanted to respond to Jonathan's question in the chat. I definitely pick this up quite a lot, Jonathan, that people will complete the assessment and they'll do it in a huge rush, especially when it's just, open-ended questions and the questions seem slightly odd. They just move through it so quickly. And then the assessment misses. So it's not always a sign of fallback, but a sign of just not paying attention to it. But that also opens up a great conversation with the client of, how often are they not really paying attention to, experiences like this? How are they sidelining their own, development as they are here with how they're completing the assessment? Yeah. Let's come to Lovemore. Lovemore, your hand still up?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, thank you. All right, so thank you very much for the opportunity. I work with teams. Not very familiar with the maturation, but the insights shared today gave me some ideas of how this can be applied in the teams, combining this with the Enneagram. So I have a question, and the question is, and I suppose there is an assessment for maturation that can be done for the teams, right? So if you do an assessment for, say, a team, and they are all at different maturation stages, what is your goal as a coach? Is the goal to get them all to the same level of maturation, or it's healthy to have them in different levels of maturation, and then you can be able to take advantage of the different maturation levels in the team dynamics? Well, what should the goal of a coach be?
What a great question.
Yeah, and no simple answers.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kate.
Shall I go first? Give it my 2 cents. Generally, Lovemore, the experience I have is that range is important in a team. So as you're saying, like having some range, not everybody at the same stage, that can be very useful for teams because it means there's more agility around what they're bringing in different in the context in different situations. So that's very helpful. When and maybe just to go back a step, the assessment for teams is done via individual assessment. So everybody does their individual maturation assessment, and then everybody's results are added up, and that's how you get a team profile around the center of gravity that the team is showing up at. Mostly those team profiles show a little bit of range. So mostly in conventional, like specializing to performing, for example, might be the range in the team. And depending on the context and where they are, the discussion then becomes, well, where do they want to move? You know, do they need to consolidate where they are? How is this helpful for their context, or how is it unhelpful in their context? Where might they need to grow into some other aspects, which may require a maturation stage change? So it really depends on what the team needs. But what we're seeing in quite a lot of clients these days is with increasing complexity, pace, pressure in the world, we often are needing to see more of a shift into some post-conventional. So some leaders in post-conventionals, because through that, working more with the internal complexity, they're more able to navigate the external complexity. So if you have everybody at performing in a team, they will have a more linear approach to complexity. So that then points to, but I think the short answer is it depends on the team and the context and what is needed, what is best going to serve them. Yeah.
I agree. It makes me think of just one other thing around language and purpose, you know, what we are doing when we do this work and why we are doing this work. And and I don't think that it is our purpose to shift people's maturity stage. But we are there to support their maturation, which is something that is happening. Or getting stuck. You know, sometimes we get stuck. We need a little bit of help to get unstuck so that the process can unfold. And so with individuals as well, it's not our task to help people from, you know, when someone is in specializing to get to performing. That may be an outcome. It may be very well be an outcome. It may not be an outcome. It may not even be desirable. Because that person may maybe be at the point where they're not at a point of transition between stages. They're at a point where they've now got here in that stage. They now arrived, it's beginning, you know, they're becoming a little bit more familiar to themselves at this stage. And they need to develop the capacities that become available to them at this stage. Like, you know, you get into specializing. I can be independent. I develop my independence, and I can be logical. I develop my logical capabilities. And so I spend a little bit of time there. So it's different things that we can do. Sometimes we help to stabilize, and sometimes we help to transition. And I think that's the same with teams, but especially with so just in terms of language, we're not saying that our language is I'm supporting someone's maturation. I'm supporting someone's maturation. I'm supporting it. That's my intention in there. It's not your stage shift, because we sometimes cry ourselves to death.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's quite helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I see, people are starting to check out. Suzanne, I wonder if we could come to you. Do you want to say a few words about your approach? Because I see you answered the question in the chat.
Well, just when the question was, how do you even enter a debrief?
At VEDA, the Vertical Development Associates, we have a couple of questions first. When you took the test, what was that like? What was the context? And then when you received the result, what was your reaction? What kind of questions came up? What kind of sentiments and feelings did you experience before we actually go into the formal, perhaps debrief?
Yeah.
And often the test is good information for the coach without necessarily needing to give a debrief. Just another orientation means an orientation. You use the word map, we call it the map. Another form of helping people orient themselves. And in the many, many different aspects of being a human being, not just. I actually liked that you used my arc representation in one of the slides, which is a much better one because it does not so readily get interpreted as higher is better. So that's one way that also we try to do that representation first before introducing spirals and staircases and all of that.
Yeah.
Because they're all misleading. They're all vertical is very, very weird, very, very Western. It is not represented in many indigenous cultures in the same way. That's a whole other topic, of course, in any of this. How is it actually? How do human beings perceive maturity in very different cultures? And it may not be vertical.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad. I thought it was a very lovely presentation. And that's good to know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Christo, we're at time. How are we going to close this out? Are we just...
Yeah, it's on time, so...
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for rich contributions and engagement. Lovely to have you all with us. And goodbye from me. And maybe we can... Christo, would you like to say something? Or
Yeah, I also want to say thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being in this work. And and above all, for conversation. I love conversation. I'm always so happy if there's conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate and Christo, for holding this space where we can learn more and have more awareness around maturity and stages, because it can be quite complex. And for everybody sharing, I mean, I'm walking away feeling much richer after this conversation. So thank you very much for being here and for sharing. And have a good evening, and we'll see you next month. Yeah, look out for the emails.
Thank you all.
Enjoy, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.